Hello Year 9 and welcome to my first attempt at a flipped classroom activity. This particular PowerPoint is a deconstruction of the current task sheet that you've got given today, and the purpose of this is really to build up your understanding of what it is that you need to do for the current task. Please bear in mind that this is my first attempt at this, and as we discussed today, I've had numerous technical difficulties getting this up, but here we go. So this is the background of the task that kind of really looks at what we've been talking about in class. And for my class in particular, we've been looking at how what we perceive as a national identity depends on our own background and our own cultural values, and we've spent particular attention looking at how we draw on fairly stereotypical images when we're looking at our cultural identity and why we do that. So I'm really asking students to challenge those notions of what it is that makes up our national identity. So here's the task itself. So you're writing a persuasive film review, and that film review has to really focus in on how well the film represents contemporary, which means modern, Australian identity. So, is this worthwhile for a modern audience to be watching, or is it outdated? Is it stereotypical? And perhaps that doesn't matter, which we'll have a look at in more detail in class. So with the roles and relationships is really important because that kind of sets your tenor. So that's how formal you are in your writing. And as a journalist writing for the Weekend Australian, you've got a reasonably high tenor, but it does allow you scope because it's a persuasive piece to use some colloquialisms and anecdotes, etc. that might be able to further influence your audience. There's the nuts and bolts. As you can see, 300 to 500 words. You are fairly constrained in what it is that you can talk about because once you actually start going, you'll realise that that's not very long at all. But generally, film reviews in magazines and newspapers are fairly short anyway, so it's a fairly reasonable time frame, word limit to work through. The time frames there, the draft, if you want to get a draft in earlier than that, I'm quite happy to look at them and to give you as much assistance as possible. Please let me know if you're struggling with those timelines though, because we can work out solutions earlier rather than later. So in terms of the genre then, it's all about influencing. You're really trying to get your reader to accept your viewpoint about this film. And so in class we'll be looking at all the different types of persuasive techniques that we can use to do that, and there's a list of those there. So if you have any questions about what any of those things are, can you please write them down now to bring to class tomorrow. Right, the criteria. So you'll see on your task sheet that we've split up the criteria into what it says on the actual criteria sheet, and then some everyday language that explains what it is that you need to do to hit that A level. So because it's a review, you need to have a catchy title, and that, as a magazine, that's the first thing that people are going to read, and it's the first thing that's either going to entice them to keep reading or to turn the page and leave your article to gather dust. That second point there about getting a clear thesis statement. So the thesis statement is your argument. What is it you're trying to say about Red Dog? Is it representative of modern identity, or is it really just quite outdated? So in terms of getting that deep understanding in terms of the sequencing of the subject matter, you need to be really linking all your ideas together, and that they all come back to that main thesis point. And finally, that relationship between the writer and the audience is something that, it's a style that connects with and persuades the reader, but it's something that entices them to keep reading as well. So, really good reviews feel personalised. They feel like the writer's actually writing to you. Criteria 2 is really all the technical aspect of the language that you need to get right, and a lot of that comes from careful drafting. So, are you using those range of persuasive techniques? And you don't have to use them all, but are you using a good range of them? Are you putting your sentences together and linking the ideas between the paragraphs? And are you using vocabulary that's both, film-specific vocab, but also then the stuff that's really emotive and is going to make your reader persuaded to your point of view. And then the third criteria there is just looking at the way that the film links to Australian identity, and this is really the crux of what the task is asking you to do. So every paragraph needs to be focused on how well that film actually reflects modern Australia. And then to looking at specific film techniques, which we'll talk about more in class, that might then be typically Australian, or that might help us build a better understanding of our national identity.